All right. Hello and welcome to Just Animals podcast. I'm Elle, and with me, as always, is my dad, Guy.
Hello, Pod World. It's been a while. You don't have your animals, just animals t-shirt on. How come?
I know I should, well, because it's in the wash right now. I should put it on. And then we have a very special guest with us today. We have Dr. Andy Davis, all the way from a rival school of mine. I went to LSU. He's up at UGA. So a
Oh,
little bit of an
boo,
SEC
boo.
thing. Yeah. Um, but other than that, we are super excited to have our guest. And then we just want to give a quick shout out before we get into Dr. Andy Davis to Jaden. Just saw your email. Thank you so much for reaching out. Best of luck to you on your zookeeper endeavor. And when that works out, we'd love to have you as a guest on the show. So back to our special guest today, Dr. Andy Davis, if you don't mind telling us who you are and I guess how you became a bulldog, because that's a little interesting too.
Hi, folks. Yeah, thank you for having me on your show. I mean, this is it's always great to get to talk about me and what I do, and I love your podcast.
Thank
So,
you.
yeah, as you mentioned, I'm a faculty at the University of Georgia now. I'm formerly a Canadian, and
Hey,
Okay.
a long story. Yeah, well, I've been in this country in the U.S. for so long, I've lost my A.
okay.
When I first came down, it was very pronounced to the point where I would say something and people would laugh.
Oh yeah, especially in Georgia. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, but
Oh,
now
yeah.
here in Georgia, I've picked up like ma'am and y'all, and
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I even said yonder once.
Yonder.
Yeah,
Well, if you say I reckon, then we're really going to be worried
I'm
about
not
you.
I'm not there yet. I'm not there.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I
It's
don't
coming.
think that's in the Canadian lexicon, if I recall,
Right.
but
But I've been here at Georgia for almost 20 years now, and
Wow.
but I came down here, and it's a long story, but I met my wife, who's an American. We got married, and I guess that's a short story. But now here I am at the University of Georgia, where I've become a lifelong Bulldogs fan, and it's hard not to be a fan when your team is the national champions twice in a row.
yeah, and your quarterback's 30
Wow.
years old. But
Excuse me, excuse me, he wasn't that old, but we got a new quarterback this year.
oh, well, we'll be excited to watch that. So what do
Yeah.
you so what do you study? What do you I get yeah,
Okay.
yeah, let's get into that.
Yeah. So that's a good question. Sometimes I ask myself that same question. My my studies include a variety of animals, and I've been doing this for 2 decades plus now. And it seems like every couple of years I switch things up, and
Right
that's
on.
that's partly a good thing, partly a bad thing.
Sure.
In the sciences, you want to be known for something, and I'm not really known for a whole lot of things because I keep switching things up. But the short story is I've studied birds, I've studied amphibians, I've studied butterflies, probably the longest, especially the monarch butterfly. And I also studied a new invasive spider here in Georgia, the Juro spider, and also a beetle and a parasite that lives in a certain beetle here in Georgia. So, my problem is that I'm too easily distracted.
No, that's fair. We love the variety.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
We rarely run into that. It's usually I found this animal and I've just been studying it for the last 20 years and that's it, which is fine too. So, but it's also fun to have some variety. So I saw on your website, it said like vertebrates. Is that what the general umbrella term that you just kind of put yourself under, or was that given to you?
Uh, well, I mean, even now, I mean, I don't study a whole lot of vertebrates these days. It's
Oh
a
yeah.
lot of inputs, and
Yeah,
so
I guess
I think
so.
earlier in my career, yeah, it was all birds, ornithology, some herpetology, and so that's where the vertebrates came from. But I guess to be fair, a lot of my focus in my research is on how the physiology of said creatures affects their life,
Oh,
and so
interesting.
when you study physiology, you're not really wedded to any one particular animal, and that's kind of a good thing. It allows you to sort of, because physiology is physiology. All animals breathe, all animals have a metabolism, all animals have blood, and so you can sort of, take some lessons from different taxonomic
Sure.
groups and research, and sort of apply it to whatever you're studying. And I kind of
Right.
like that.
Absolutely. So I have a question about that. So when you in your studies, because I know some animals have like copper-based blood as opposed to like iron-based blood like us, so it's like more of a their blood's more like blue. Have you studied any animals with like different blood bases?
I don't think I've ever done that kind of work that you're focusing on, that you're talking about. A lot of my work in animals, in particular with their blood, with vertebrates, has been using blood samples to assess how stressed they are. And I know there's a fair amount of that work in the zoo world as well, because in the zookeeping business, we want to know if the animals are stressed. And so I spent a fair amount of my career devoted to understanding how you can use blood samples to assess stress levels in vertebrates.
Absolutely. So you're testing for cortisol levels? Do animals have cortisol
Not
or
really.
release
In
cortisol
fact,
like us?
there's a variety of other approaches you can actually use to assess stress levels in animals besides cord, which is what you're referring to. So cortisol is the stress hormone that everybody knows. But in fact, my focus was on using white blood cells as a measure of their stress reactions. And that's a sort of a lesser known way of assessing stress in animals.
Interesting.
But it's just as viable, and in fact, it has some advantages.
Oh, wow. Okay. Wow. You
So
just
that's sort of earlier in my career. I don't do a whole lot of that right now. In fact, these days I'm mostly focused on butterflies, especially monarch butterflies. Like I said, a beetle and a parasite that lives inside them, and now this new invasive gyrro spider here in the southeast. But I think of all those things, I've studied the monarch butterflies for the longest in my career.
Excellent. Well, let's get into the monarch, because that's one of my favorites. How's the colony doing?
Yeah.
Let's start there. Let's start there.
Yes.
The monarch butterfly
good
colony.
Question. And it's funny that you're having me on your show, because I know you just had another representative talking about monarchs in your previous episode. And this is kind of an interesting juxtaposition, because I would say that my take on a lot of things related to monarchs is probably different than sort of what you hear in the news or what you hear from representatives of conservation groups. And I like to think that my take is perhaps solely objective. And it's because I don't work for anybody, just my university, right? I'm not tied to any conservation group. I'm not asking for funding. I'm not seeking anything, really. I'm just a scientist who sits in his office and looks at data all day. And so I think that I like to think that my take is not really tied to anything else.
Sure.
And so I know your previous guest had talked a lot about the monarchs, and there was a lot of you guys talked a lot about the monarch biology, the monarch migration, milkweed, a lot of that, is very good information to know. So I feel like I don't really need to go into that very much. But to your question, Guy, that how are the monarchs doing? That's probably like the biggest question that we in the monarch world are facing right now. And it's probably the most controversial. And I say that because I'm a scientist who has actually been telling people for many years now that the monarchs aren't doing as bad as people think. So there's a fair amount of what I would say dogma out there in the internet land and on social media, and a lot of sort of narratives, ongoing narratives about the monarchs that you've probably heard, that the monarchs are in trouble. Everybody needs to plant milkweed. They're going to go extinct any day now. Those kinds of things. Really, those are stories that have kind of snowballed in the internet land. And a lot of it is some of it is based on science, but maybe outdated science, I would say. Because it's science that we knew like 10 years ago. So what you are pointing out, Guy, is that the monarchs undertake this long distance migration every fall to these wintering colonies in Mexico. And your previous guest, pointed this out quite well. And those colonies in Mexico are kind of what we've always been using to assess, quote unquote, the population size. And that idea is really not correct based on what we know now. At the time, it seemed it seemed logical, right? The monarchs, we thought that they all arrived in Mexico That was the first sort of assumption. But it turns out they don't. So we thought they all arrived in Mexico. They all hang out on these trees up in these mountains. And as your previous guest pointed out, researchers in Mexico sort of assess the size of those colonies every year. And it seems so logical. The monarchs are just hanging there on the trees. They're not moving. Let's just see how big they are, how big the colony is. And as you know, if you look at the annual estimates of the colony sizes over time, over the last 25 years or so, there was a decline in those colony sizes. And everybody thought that meant the entire population was declining.
Oh,
It
not just that
seems
specific
logical,
colony?
right? Well, you're sort of onto it there. It's not that it's a specific colony. It's just that that's just one point of its life cycle.
Oh, gotcha.
okay,
Sure,
okay.
sure.
And the other point that people fail to realize is that they don't all arrive there. So those Mexico colony sizes only make sense if they all get there.
Yeah.
But if they don't, then you're not really assessing the population size. What you're assessing is how many made the trip. And so if you look at it that way, then you start to see that the Mexico colony sizes aren't really a good estimate of the colonies of the population. They're an estimate of how many survived the migration.
Oh,
The reason I
okay.
say it that way is because just last year, I was part of a team of scientists from here at Georgia that actually looked at the size of the monarch population during the summer, like away from Mexico when the monarchs are breeding in the US and Canada. And during that summer period, they're all over the place here in the US and Canada. So it's a really, really big geographic scope. And a lot of people don't realize, but we actually have records, good surveys of butterflies over the last 25 years throughout this entire breeding range. And they're done by the North American Butterfly Association, which is a group of volunteers who go out every summer. They look for all the butterflies they see, and then they record them. And our team from UGA actually looked at all of those records going back 25 years. There were 135,000 records of monarch butterflies. And so it was a massive, massive data set, probably the biggest assessment of the monarch population during the summer that has ever been done.
Wow.
And guess what we found? There was no decline.
Wow.
There was no decline at all.
Interesting.
There were some pockets in the US. There were places where there were some declines.
Sure.
There were some places where there were some increases. But when you put them all together, really we saw ups and downs, but no real long-term trajectory down.
Sure.
But this is in contrast to what we see at the Mexico colonies. And so I've always sort of said that, you got to think of this as like a marathon. And what we've been doing for many years is we've been assessing how many marathoners finish the race. And we haven't really been assessing the numbers that start the race.
Right.
And so if the numbers that start the race haven't declined, but the numbers that finish have declined, you wouldn't conclude that the entire marathon is declining. You would conclude that the marathon is getting harder, maybe. Right. And that's kind of what we think is going on, at least a select few scientists and I think is going on right now with the monarchs. So to make a long story short, the population isn't declining. The migration is.
Oh,
So
interesting.
let me ask a fundamental
That's a
question.
really good counterpoint.
How do you take a monarch census? How is that done?
In the breeding season, it's fairly simple. And in fact, there's a variety of different organizations who actually do this in different states around the country. So the North American Butterfly Association, the group that I just mentioned. So they actually do this by having volunteers go out and census butterflies in a circle around the town that they live in. and the circle is a certain area that they have to sort of stay within, and they just basically go out, they drive or they walk, however the way they want to do it. They keep track of their hours and they keep track of the number of people watching, and they basically survey the same places every year. And so every year they record how many butterflies they see, and they record everything, not just monarchs, but all the butterflies that they see. And so it's a really good record of butterfly abundance in the summer. And so that's just one organization, and there's like dozens of different organizations out there in different states that sort of have also been censusing butterflies in their particular region. So what everybody has sort of taken from what the dogma basically says is that those wintering colonies in Mexico represent the entire population, which is not really true.
Gotcha.
And so we used to think 10 years ago that all of the habitat was being lost by for the monarchs too, because those long-term declines in Mexico must mean that they're losing all of their milkweed, they're losing all of their habitat. But if you think about the study I just mentioned, we found ups and downs in different regions, but no overall long-term decline. So if the monarch butterflies in the summer are still capable of reproducing just as well now as they were before, that must mean they have all of the resources that they currently need.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So by inference, then their quote unquote habitat has not declined either. So I know this sounds crazy, and because it goes against everything you thought you knew about monarchs.
Yeah.
And it goes against what your prior guest also pointed out as well. And this is why I sort of preface this whole thing by saying I don't work for anybody, just a scientist who looks at data. And from what I see, the data I see tells me that the monarch butterflies in the summer are doing just fine.
So should we be planting milkweed or don't plant milkweed?
Okay, so that's the next obvious logical question, right?
Yes.
So again, what I said before is if they have enough resources now in the summer to produce a stable population, by inference, that means they have enough milkweed. And this is also ludicrous to people because you've heard over and over again that monarchs are in trouble. They're losing all of their milkweed. And everybody needs to go and plant as much milkweed as you can find. But again, if you look at the data, it doesn't show that the milkweed is limiting. It shows that the monarch population is doing just fine. And so I get this a lot when I say this. People sort of look at me like with the deer in the headlights. People sometimes get mad at me for telling them this, for telling them the good news, right? Really good
How dare
news
you?
that monarchs are doing great.
If it bleeds, it leads.
Yeah. And so this isn't the first time I've said this, and it always comes across as this weird, counter story that goes against everything you thought you knew because you've been told over and over again that monarchs are in trouble. And so in my career right now, I find myself at a place where I don't think monarchs need our help. What I think we need is help getting the real message across to people, getting people to accept the actual data. And it's sometimes hard to do this because it feels really good to help monarchs.
Sure, of course. Feels good to help any animal or a person.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. So this is why I think the dogma has sort of perpetuated for so long. This story that monarchs are in trouble and that it sort of touches a nerve, right? Or it tugs on your heartstrings. And you go out, you get some milkweed, you put it in your garden, and you see a butterfly come and land on it, and you get this warm feeling, right? You just help that butterfly. And so it's hard to combat that feeling with objective hard data, right? Because people really like that feeling. And so when I come across and I tell people, well, they don't really need as much help as what you think, that's where people get upset.
Sorry for
Mm.
laughing,
so
but
it's weird, right? I mean, it's so I've had the same conversation with lots of people, and sometimes people get mad at me, and so it's really weird.
But if that's what your data shows, that's what your data, it's just, I think it's hard for a lot of people to be able to look at data objectively or just look at anything objectively. I think, unfortunately, we don't really teach that skill, objective thinking, and just looking at data and interpreting it for what it is, not adding how we think it is, or because I've done little studies on my own and like hoped that it's, or even thought I knew something about something, looked it up, and then prove myself wrong by doing more thorough research and be like, oh, that kind of sucks. But okay, if that's what the data shows, then that's what the data shows. So I just think objective thinking is not very common.
Kudos to you for being able to do that, because it sometimes it's hard for people to sort of think about it that way. So to get back to your point, Guy, to your question, how are the monarchs doing?
Yes,
I think they're doing quite well.
great. I'm happy to hear that. All I can tell you is that when I was little, I was growing up in New York City, and I think the spring or the summer, there were tons of monarchs. I don't know if I don't live in New York City anymore, but there were a lot. And that
you know what I'm going to say?
Go ahead.
I'm going to say your memory is wrong.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Well,
I've heard this many times before.
Finish him.
And what I can tell you is that you probably didn't. You probably saw a migratory swarm or a migratory passage, right?
That could be
every fall. And people sort of get kind of sketchy on the details of when they saw all those monarchs. I hear this a lot. I used to see dozens of monarchs in my yard.
Right.
I think to myself, no, you didn't.
Yes, drag him.
Monarchs don't do that. They're territorial. You'll see one or two at one place. Yeah. And you never see them in that much abundance unless it's during the fall migration. And during the fall, they're passing through places in swarms. I mean, I've literally been at Cape May, New Jersey during the fall migration, and it's like they call it an orange blizzard.
Huh. All right.
When they're just passing by left and right, and there's monarchs everywhere. And so I think what people kind of remember in their minds is those migratory swarms when they really are monarchs everywhere.
Okay. If you say so.
I can see one of those this fall if I wanted to. I know a really good place where I could go here on campus, and if I pick the right day, I could go and see dozens in one place.
Where in Athens, Georgia, on campus? What building specifically can we go to? Or what landmark on campus can we go to in Athens?
I don't want to give away my trade secrets.
That's fine.
That's
well, I have a quick question.
Go ahead. We'll let you get
Thank you. Yeah, I feel like you need to process everything you know is a lie. But anyways. Is it possible that because we've been like on milkweed overdrive, save the monarchs, that the colony in Mexico has been diminishing because they just don't need to necessarily make the migration down there since their needs are being met here? Like, they only need to go as far south as San Diego or, the southern tip of Texas or Louisiana or Florida. It's like, this is good, actually. We don't need to go all the way to Mexico because our needs are being met here. Is that possible, or is that a hypothesis?
Yes and no. What you're suggesting is that maybe the migration itself is not as necessary anymore.
Right.
And we're starting to think that might be the case in a small percentage of monarchs may not be making the trip anymore because it's simply not as cold in certain places of the U.S. like Texas, Louisiana. I mean, in Florida, there's a well-known non-migratory population that just stays year-round because it's nice and warm in the winter. Southern California, another place where it's getting warm in the winter, and we're getting these pockets of non-migratory butterflies forming. So yes, to answer your question, that is happening to some degree. We don't know what scale it's happening, but in 100 years from now, that might be the
new norm.
The new norm for monarchs, which is unfortunate because that migration is sort of the thing that makes them so special.
Sure.
It's kind of like the late great Lincoln Brower, a longtime monarch researcher, always used to say he called the migration like the Mona Lisa. It's a special event. It's a special, inspiring thing that gets people excited about nature, right?
Sure.
And so for the monarchs, that's the thing that's in trouble, and I think that's the thing that we need to preserve. Now, another reason why I want to make sure people realize that what I'm saying is that the monarchs, so let me back up. People need to hear this from me, because I think what happens is when people hear the monarchs are in trouble, and especially that monarchs need milkweed. And your former guest alluded to this too. One trap they can fall into is people can actually plant the wrong milkweed. So there's some non-native milkweeds.
Right.
Yes, she did emphasize, like, find the milkweed that is native to your state, to your town. Don't just go buy milkweed and plant it.
Yes. And so I want to make sure people hear that from me as well, because that's one thing we do agree on. Is non-native milkweeds really are bad for the monarchs, especially they're bad for the monarch migration. And there's a fair amount of research on this. We know that when monarch caterpillars grow up on this non-native milkweed, it makes them not as good at migrating.
Oh, interesting.
If there's one thing we need to preserve, it's the migration. And the last thing you want to do is give them this non-native milkweed, which actually, is bad for the migration.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I was trying to find that information because I'm going to pull this up if I can find it. You probably know
So
this
I have another question too. Can we actually go back to monarch butterflies being territorial? Can you go into that a little bit further?
Yeah, this isn't my area of expertise.
Right, you're not a
I'm mostly a
behaviorist.
migration guy. Yeah, but in the summer, male monarchs are territorial, where they'll just sort of take a patch of milkweed and they'll sort of patrol it. And they'll sort of fly around that milkweed patch, and they'll sort of grab onto any female monarchs they can find that come in, and they'll sort of mate with them. They'll also even chase off other butterfly species. And that's kind of fun to watch too.
Sure.
So they'll take over a little milkweed patch, and they'll sort of set up a little territory in the summer.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Really fun to watch.
I bet. So I had another question on top of that. Have you done their studies on how they respond to stress? Since you mentioned that earlier, or how are they responding to stress?
Yeah, that's another point of interest for me. I've actually studied this in monarchs. Believe it or not, you can actually measure how stressed a monarch is by looking at its heartbeat. And I've actually done this in my lab. Yeah, I've done this with caterpillars, and I've done this with adult butterflies. And so monarchs, insects, like any other animal, have a heart, and it beats. It's not like yours and mine. It's not like a little bulbous thing. It's more like a long tube that runs along their back.
Right.
And that tube sort of, the sides of that tube pump in and out, and they sort of have a rhythm to them. And so anyway, they have a heartbeat and a heart rate. And just like any other insect or any other animal, when they get excited, their heart rate goes up. And if you know exactly what to look for on the butterfly or the caterpillar, you can actually measure that heart rate. And so I've actually measured the heart rates of caterpillars in response to stressors. And I've measured adult monarchs as well. Adult monarchs don't get as stressed as you might as much as caterpillars do. The caterpillars seem to be especially sensitive to stressors, but adult monarchs not so much, which is something that deserves further research.
Interesting.
So let me ask you a question. Have you ever heard of the, I hope I pronounce this right, Xerces Society?
Xerces, yes. Yeah.
Say that.
Xerces.
Xerces, yeah. So
it's an insect conservation organization stationed in the West.
Are they legit?
Yeah.
Okay.
I will sort of say that I mentioned before that I don't work for any organization.
Yeah.
And so there's a variety of organizations out there that have sort of capitalized on the monarch decline story.
Mm-hmm.
And because
I've stopped my check to the WWW or F. No, I'm just teasing. I didn't stop my check.
yeah. I mean, I get these pamphlets in the mail too, right? You know, save the monarch,
Sure.
you know,
Yes.
donate money.
Yeah.
And it works. That's the thing, right? That people
Right.
love to save the monarchs, and you know, the monarch story sells. And so, I mean, I don't want to point fingers at anybody, but you know, your previous guest, you know, works for an organization,
Right.
and I don't. And so
Okay.
I think the story you're getting from me is a little different, and that's probably why. Xerxes is another organization. They do great work. I have some trouble with them because they've capitalized on the monarch story as well.
Mm.
So the
So
study,
do you ever challenge them? Do you ever say, show me your data?
yeah,
And
I
what do
do.
they do? What do they
It-
say?
They sweep me under the rug.
Oh, okay.
Well, that's one
So-
way to deal with you. Sure.
Yeah.
Shut up, Dr. Andy. Just shut up.
Pretty much, yeah. I've kind of become the black sheep of the
Yeah,
monarch.
stop
Ah,
rocking our
yes.
boat here, man.
Yes,
We got people,
The Monarch
sending in
Pariah.
money.
We love that for you. We're gonna make
It's-
t-shirts, Monarch Pariah.
you know,
Perfect.
some of
Think
the,
about it. The story I'm telling is the inconvenient truth, right?
okay.
Yeah, sometimes people,
Nobody
yeah, the
wants to
truth
hear it.
hurts sometimes,
Well,
you know.
I do have to say that this milkweed has a nice flowering. I mean, some of the different species are very nicely flowering, and
I mean, so here's the thing. I mean, telling people that monarchs are doing fine.
yeah,
I mean, they're not going to donate to your organization to save them.
exactly.
No.
Right.
So there's no organization out there that's going to tell you what I just told you.
So let me ask you a question from your point of view. I have 2 hummingbird feeders. I know you're not a hummingbird expert.
Well, he
Should
said
I be-
ornithology. He did. He wasn't.
Oh yeah, you did do bird. Should I be putting out my hummingbird feeder or not? I mean, I do like to see them come and eat.
It's not about you.
But you're right. It is not about. But I don't want to
No,
rock the boat.
Let me stop you, Al, because it actually is about him. So
Boo, boo,
Thank you.
boo.
Thank you. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
so the practice of putting out bird feeders is also something that has some controversy to it.
Yeah.
Yes.
My
You
son
know,
tells me I'm disturbing nature.
You
Well,
are, and they're just gonna shit all over the backyard.
Not, I
it's-
don't. A
it's-
hummingbird is small.
a lot of it is people do this because it makes them feel good too, right? You're helping these critters, that you're feeding them, right?
Yes.
And there's some pros and cons to doing this, right? The pro is you actually are helping them in the winter, right? Especially some seed feeding birds who probably can't get some food elsewhere.
Okay.
But on the other hand, those birds were doing just fine before humans came along, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what you're doing by providing a bird feeder, whether it's hummingbirds or a suet feeder or whatever it is that you're telling the birds to come to one place. You're sort of accumulating them, crowding them into one place. And what that can do is actually transmit some diseases from one bird to another more readily.
Oh boy.
Good
And so-
job.
Okay.
You're gonna start bird COVID. Way to
Okay.
go.
So there
So-
are a variety of bird diseases that do get transmitted from bird feeders. And
oh boy.
so that's the con, right?
Yeah.
So on the one hand, you're helping, on the other hand, you're not helping. And so the practice of bird feeding
Oh,
is
he
really
froze.
more about,
both
people and bringing birds closer. Some people would argue that you're making a connection, you're helping people get connected with nature. I mean, a lot of people did this during the lockdowns, but now we're seeing that those lockdown effects had some longer term effects on the birds. I mean, so, everything that we do with nature, our interactions are having an effect. And sometimes our interactions are really, because we want to help.
Right.
I
Sure.
want to help you so much, I'm gonna hurt you.
So once again, I take a very agnostic view on bird feeding as just as much as I do with monarchs. I think we need to look at all of the data and make sort of informed decisions about our practices and what we're doing.
So you bring up a good point about, since you can stay objective because you don't have any funding. We sometimes every now and then have a bone to pick with the IUCN. I'm sure you're very well aware of that organization. And it seems like, and I'm sure you've noticed this too, animals unfortunately become trendy. And it's like, we should care about all the animals, not just, the platypus is popular this month, or the sloth has become really popular in llamas or whatever. And it just seems like animals become trendy, and then whatever's trending is like, oh, they're threatened or endangered. And I could be talking out of my butt here, but it's just kind of something I've noticed throughout the years of doing this show. And like, animals that don't seem to get as much attention, or animals that, maybe aren't as cute and cuddly, like a crocodile, don't get the attention that they deserve. Like when we had Ben Pearson on from World Animal Protection, he was telling us like about the unethical and horrible farming that they do for these fashion designers for these crocodile skin bags. It's gross, but it's a crocodile. The crocodile doesn't have the same appeal as a wombat or a kangaroo, so it kind of gets swept under the rug. And it's like, well, no, you can't just abuse these crocodiles either. They're not just these mindless killing machines. But again, if you look on the IUCN, they're not very they're maybe like near threatened, not like necessarily threatened or endangered.
Yeah, so that's a really astute observation. I have some bones to pick with the IUCN as well. And let me come back to that. But
Sure.
to your point about, using the more
That's why he doesn't want to give out his address.
Yeah. They're going to find you.
Yes.
Yeah.
They're going to have
I might get some hate mail for this. But
they're going to have a Professor Rumble,
Yeah.
Yeah, or the white van pulls up.
There are some in the science world, especially entomologists, who would argue that, protecting the monarchs, or the story about the monarchs, is actually helping to protect a lot of other insects that
Sure.
are less charismatic.
Sure.
And so there are some of my colleagues who actually know the truth about monarchs, but they're not going out of their way to correct the record, because they know that the monarch story is a powerful motivator, and it gets people to protect insects in general, right? When you provide for monarchs, you're helping insects. But as a scientist, I find that a little unethical, because it's a bit of a white lie, right? It's not really what the data shows. And as scientists, we're supposed to be objective. And I think our job is to tell people what the data shows.
Right.
But okay, so to the IUCN, I mean, I've got a bone to pick with them, because they listed the monarchs as endangered last year. And this was huge news. And it was very, it was big. I mean, I talked to some people at the IUCN. They said when they did that, it was their biggest PR event in the history of their organization. There was so much news about the monarch listing last fall, or last summer, that it was over the top. And it came exactly 1 month after our study came out showing that monarchs are doing just fine. And so that's why I have a bone to pick with them, because what they did was, and I shouldn't say they, because it really wasn't the IUCN that did this. A lot of people think that this organization, which is based in Switzerland, made this decision. It wasn't. It was a small group of US-based scientists, including people at Xerxes, who actually made this listing. And so, what they did was they wrote up a report, and they gave that to the IUCN, and the IUCN kind of gave it a rubber stamp. And the report, which I've read extensively, was completely based on the declining numbers of overwintering monarchs in Mexico. Completely. I mean, there was also some mention of monarchs in the West Coast, which have also shown a decline at the wintering colonies. But as I just pointed out, those wintering colonies don't tell the whole story.
Right.
But if you only look at the wintering colonies, you get this misleading picture of what the actual population is doing, right? And if you actually read the IUCN report, there was no mention of any other data of the long-term of the numbers of monarchs in the summer. There was no other data set mentioned. And so it was more of the same sort of dogma that sort of was casting the monarchs as being the species that's on the brink of extinction, when that's not really the case at all.
Yeah, so they took one piece. It was like they took like one piece of data and then just kind of ran with it, and like that's what the story is going to focus on instead of kind of the whole picture.
So you're saying this work doesn't have to be peer reviewed; it's just whatever they say goes. Is that pretty much it?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, there were some officials at the IUCN who looked at it, but so the reason I know so much about this is because I've actually challenged that decision. I've made an official challenge to the IUCN listing And right now that challenge is pending. So right now the IUCN, so a lot of people don't know this, but the IUCN has a procedure where they allow outside scientists or other experts to make any challenge they want to any decision that they've made, whether it's on elephants or lions or zebras or whatever it is, right?
Sure.
And so last fall, I challenged this whole decision because of everything I just told you, because it wasn't based on the most accurate, up-to-date information.
Sure.
And in fact, if you look at the actual long-term trends of the number of the counts in Mexico, for the last 10 years, those winter colonies have actually not changed in size at all. So for the last 10 years, those colony sizes have been more or less stable, no decline. In fact, a slight increase, if anything. And so the IUCN listing actually was characterizing the entire population as being in decline, even to this day, right? Like right up till now, which is sort of a mischaracterization. And it was based on some statistics that really shouldn't have been done. Anyway, so long story short, I challenged the whole decision. It's now pending. There was a committee of experts who are deliberating on this now. In September, they are going to make a decision on whether this challenge has been accepted. If that's the case, monarchs will be delisted from the IUCN completely.
Oh,
And then everyone's going to hate you because
And-
you got them delisted.
Yeah.
How dare you, Dr.
That's
Andy?
right.
God damn it.
wait till the WWF comes and duct tapes your mouth, Dr.
It will
Andy.
be huge news, yeah, when that happens.
So
But
I have
I think it will be fair news because, I mean, it's the truth.
But it's good news, though. I mean,
I like that it's truth.
It's good. I mean, yeah, granted, they can't run the monarchs are in trouble. But I mean, who doesn't want to hear about a species being downgraded from, near threatened to, not too stable
Well,
or almost threatened or whatever.
The people who aren't going to like it are the people who have sort of capitalized on this story. Right?
Sure.
And to be fair, there was a lot of money that was allocated to conservation groups after the IUCN listing.
Aren't there monarch stamps? I want to say there are monarch that we had monarch stamps or something like that was going to like save the monarchs. I want to say there was a monarch stamp for a minute.
I mean, it's become a sort of a business, saving the monarch. Right? I mean, there's nurseries, like plant growers that tell people to save the monarchs, plant this milkweed. There's T-shirts, there's kits you can get to make your garden more monarch friendly. I mean, there's a lot of money invested in saving monarchs.
Become a business.
What are your? I know you said you're invertebrates, so I'm going to take this question a little outside the monarch, but I want to come back to monarch. Bats.
Oh boy, I don't know if I have much to tell you about bats. I might have one publication in my CV on bats.
Yeah,
it was mostly on sort of bat coloration. So
let's go into that. Absolutely.
Yeah, but before we go into that, I want to ask a question about monarchs. Are monarchs like a fingerprint that they're no two alike, or do I have that
spots?
wrong?
Okay, so I heard your previous episode, and I heard you ask the other guest the same question.
Yes.
And her answer didn't quite give you the answer you wanted. So my answer is no. They're not all unique. So the monarchs are basically they all have the same color pattern. They all have the same wing pattern as the next one. What changes is there's some slight deviations in how much black is on this butterfly versus that butterfly, or how big the spots are on the butterfly in this butterfly versus that one. And that's a sort of a great segue, because earlier this summer, I was part of a team of researchers who discovered that the size of those spots on the monarch butterfly wings actually have some aerodynamic benefits for the monarchs, of all things.
Interesting.
I was going to ask you about your wing study. I'm glad this segues.
Yeah, I'm looking at it here.
It was big news because it was this fun study that it threw everything we thought it was a different study than what people have heard. And it was sort of this new idea about the function of wing colors of butterflies. I mean, it was fun too, because a lot of researchers study wing colors of butterflies, and none of them actually have sort of figured out that the wings, the colors themselves, could have any aerodynamic benefit, which is sort of what we found in the study.
Wow.
Now, are the wings scaly or is it more feathery?
Yeah, so the wing colors themselves are formed by scales. So the scales on the wings give the butterflies their color, and the wings themselves, for monarchs, you've got this orange pattern. You have this orange sort of background pattern. You've got some black on their wing veins, and then you've got these white spots along the edges. So the study I just pointed out, that my team and I found that the size of those spots actually provides the monarchs an aerodynamic benefit, because what we found was that the monarchs that actually are successful at reaching Mexico tend to have larger white spots than those that haven't started the trip yet. And so what we figured out is that those spots actually are helping the monarchs fly by, it has to do with how the sun heats up the monarch's wings in different places along the edge.
Oh, wow.
And the white is kind of like a coolant.
Right.
And it prevents the wing in that one little small region from heating up. But then right next to that white spot is a dark spot with the black. And so if you look at the monarch edge, you've got these repeating white and black regions of the wing. And so what we think is happening is that the sun is heating up the wing spots differently. And so that you have these repeating black and white heating and cooling portions of the wing.
Interesting.
I don't think I'm probably not characterizing this the right way. On my team, I had an aerospace engineer, and he's the guy who was in charge of this part. But from what he has studied in his lab, he has basically shown that the black portions of wings of flying animals heat up better than those than the white portions, and that actually provides an aerodynamic benefit.
Interesting. So one of the things I think we learned from the previous guest was that they have to reach a certain operating temperature before they can start to fly. Is that consistent across the whole species, or does it vary by individual?
That's a pretty universal thing. Like monarchs, we know they can't fly if it's less than, like they literally can't fly, and because their wings, their muscles are too cold to actually move. Yeah. They can't fly. I think it's like 14 degrees C or 55 Fahrenheit. If it's below that temperature, they just hang it out on a tree that they're on for that they happen to be on.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Got it. Thank you.
That is all really fascinating. Okay, so now tell us about the bats really quick.
Yeah.
Oh, so good question. Part of my my area of expertise lies in measuring coloration in animals, and as you can tell from the monarch spot story, that's kind of one of my interests. And so there was a project that I had worked on years ago where I had actually measured the coloration of a specific species of bat using museum specimens. And what we found was that the bats that tend to have a darker coloration were, I'm forgetting the actual trend that we found. I think there was a slight difference in their biology compared to the ones that had sort of a lighter coloration to them. But that's sort of a theme that I've sort of taken from different parts of my research areas. Like in the world of ornithology, a lot of researchers sort of measure the coloration of birds, right? Because we know that a lot of bird species, especially those that have a different colored male than the female, mm-hmm. we know that those males tend to be brightly colored because they want to attract the female.
Right.
Those bright colors sort of signify their fitness to the female. Mm-hmm. And sort of, I've actually sort of taken some of that information and some of those findings and applied that to the world of butterflies and monarchs especially. Okay. And so it's been, that's sort of one of the reasons why I think it's good to have these sort of multi research focus, right?
Sure.
Where you can sort of apply different findings from different areas.
Have we been lied to about bees as well?
A little bit, yes.
Oh gosh, because I
Yeah.
thought really, I mean, bees are critical for agriculture, as you know, and
Well,
we
this is another sort of almost universally known piece of dogma that's sort of circulated around the internet, right? So this idea of saving the bees comes from the story that we've all that really is true, where honeybees, there's been some collapses of the colonies, right? And we
right,
hear
right,
where there's honeybee keepers have lost so many percentages of the colony that year. And I know this past winter there was a pretty big die off. And I know that research is ongoing, and we still don't know all of the ins and outs of this so-called colony collapse disorder.
Mhm.
But that thing
Yeah.
is that's a real thing. But what you might have been lied to a little bit is about how honeybees need to be saved, right? So keep in mind, honeybees are it's a non-native species that we brought to this continent to
Ooh,
help us with our agriculture, right?
Mhm.
interesting.
And
Okay.
what research is showing now is that honeybees actually can interfere with the lives of native bees here in the US and Canada and in this continent. And we're finding out now that there's some competition, right, for wildflowers and nectar and everything that the bees do, right? And so we're finding out now that honeybees aren't really good for native bees. And so the story that we've heard about saving the honeybees is based on these colony collapse disorders. But to be fair, we've brought these bees over here to help us with our agriculture. And really what we should be saving is our native bees, which really no one's paying attention to.
So
So
those the beekeepers and the bees that they use for almond trees, those are not the native bees, you're telling me.
no, not really. And
Yikes.
Oh boy. Oh
Invasive
boy.
the industry,
species.
I don't want
Wow.
to.
You've
I mean,
really ripped the Band-Aid off my eyeballs.
I mean, if you think about it, those bees are actually shipped
Yeah.
around the country on semi trucks. It's crazy what happens with honeybees. But a beekeeper in Florida, right, will lease their honeybees to an almond grower in California. And so
I've
what
heard about
the
that.
beekeeper in Florida will put them all on a semi truck, transport them, across the country and they'll sit in the almond groves for like 2 months to pollinate the almond trees, right? And then after that, then they'll be shipped to a different place, maybe Washington State, to pollinate the apple trees. And so the whole beekeeping industry is based around shipping massive numbers of bees around the country.
Wow.
It's so weird
That is,
when you think about it.
it's
Collect
like
every
all these
time
bees back,
instead of
though.
migrant farmers, we have migrant bees.
Yeah, but how do you collect all your bees back?
Another one of those. I mean, to be fair, let me back up a bit. To be fair, we need those bees.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Our agricultural system requires bees, lots of bees. Maybe more than the native bees could ever provide for us. Like, we need a lot of bees.
All right.
And this system, what we have now of shipping bees around, is working.
For now.
It's
Okay.
working for us. That is
All right.
working for us,
Yeah.
us humans. Whether it's working to help our native insects, our native bees, that's another question. I mean, I actually looked into getting a bee colony myself. I was really into this for a while. I was this close to getting my own beehive, to become a beekeeper.
Yes.
But once I read about this research showing how that's not really what we need for our native bees, and it could actually cause some trouble for our native bees, I actually pulled the plug and I decided not to do it. And I was really hoping for some homemade honey.
Yeah, but so you're telling me that you can't raise enough native bees to make it worthwhile?
I don't know if we could ship them around the country. I mean,
Do we have native
we just don't
honeybees?
manage native bees.
You would think that these bees would be localized. I didn't think that they were like a traveling show, going around the
Ringling
country.
Brothers Bee Circus?
No, because you would think that they might import things that are being harmful to the environment in California.
This is where it gets really weird now, because with the declines in our our honeybees, what's happening now is that some beekeepers are importing other bee species
Eek.
from like Australia or Europe, or I can't remember the actual place, right?
No.
But they're importing them from other countries to bring into this country to now help pollinate our crops, right?
We all know
And
how
so
that
this
story goes.
is worldwide, right? Including any diseases, any parasites.
Right, right, exactly.
So again, it's another one of those things where we humans are doing something to our natural world, for ourselves, thinking we're helping. Maybe we're helping, maybe we're not. I think we need to look at all of the data for these kinds of things.
There are many cases in nature where we try to eliminate an oversupply of one species with
Hello,
a predator
Yellowstone
species,
and the
and then the
wolves.
predator species takes over.
No, the prey species takes over.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
So I like what you're alluding to, Guy. I mean,
yeah,
and this very thing is the reason why I have this sort of take home message of my own to everybody, whether it's monarchs or honeybees or birds or whatever. Based on all of my work and all of the readings I've done and everything we've just talked about, these kinds of things, I've come to the conclusion that we humans need to let nature be. And
Yeah.
yeah. Yes,
Leave
I
it
think you're
alone.
absolutely right.
we kind
Leave
of
it
need to
alone.
stop sort of thinking that we need to fix things that because this is the real problem with monarchs, right? People think, monarchs have declined because of us, so now it's up to us to fix it, right?
Mhm.
And people, we have the same approach for a lot of things in the natural world, whether it's fish or birds or whatever. We think that we can micromanage them by bringing in this new species or fixing this habitat versus that
Yeah.
one, or this management, this idea that we can manage our way out of our problems. I think we would be better off stepping back and doing nothing, letting
Yeah.
nature take care of itself, let it rebuild, and I actually have the same take-home message to people who want to plant a garden for butterflies, right? I tell people, insects and butterflies may not need your garden.
Mhm.
What you can do is just sort of stop mowing and, let your grass grow. Let wildflowers grow, and that's your garden. You don't really need to plant anything, right? And
Yeah.
you'll produce just as many insects and butterflies as a like a fully managed butterfly garden is if you do nothing. So my approach is to be lazy, do nothing.
Laissez-faire.
Yeah.
So
Well,
question,
this has
wait,
been
question.
one.
Do
Okay,
we
go ahead.
have native honeybees in North America and in this country?
Oh, we've got lots of native bees. Yeah. And again, I'm not an expert on this part, but it's many thousands of native bees, and they do just as good a job, if not better, than honeybees. Although
So maybe,
we don't move them around and that kind of thing.
right. So maybe the message needs to be save the local honeybees, not save
Yeah.
random Farmer John's honeybees over here.
I think insects need our help, but again, they don't need us to manage them. They just
Sure.
need us to provide places for them to be. And so I always
Okay.
sort of end these kinds of conversations by saying, if you've got a backyard, take a section of your yard and just leave it. Leave it for the insects, leave it for the critters. You'll do a world of good if you just provide a place for them to let them be. And
Excellent.
you don't need to step in and do anything, just let it be.
So what you're saying is I can
Doc-
never move the grill that a rabbit has taken residency under in my backyard. That's what you're saying. Got it.
Well, Dr. Davis, you have certainly
We are
enlightened
going
us.
to need
Yeah,
to
we may
follow
have
up
to
with
have you
you
back
after. Yeah, no,
and-
I will be in touch. Probably I'm going to make a note in my calendar now, end of September, so we can discuss the
Wow.
IUCN
I'm sure
ruling.
you'll hear about that. Yeah, it's going to be pretty big news. I mean,
You know what, too? I wonder if we ever could arrange like a debate. Would you be willing to do that? Like if we had point counterpoint?
Science battle royale.
Yes,
Welcome to the
exactly. Science
Thunderdome.
cage match. Right.
yeah, that would be fine. I mean, to be honest, we do debate a lot in the monarch world. I mean, there's some scientists who don't really think the way I do, and we've had debates before, and so I'm all for telling people this, this alternative story, because I think
Absolutely.
it's
So do you think there's like a confirmation bias, or do educated people filter their data with their own filter? Is that what you're
no,
telling me?
there's definitely confirmation bias, and you guys kind of did that in your last episode, because the previous guest sort of was telling you that the monarchs are in trouble, right? And
Well,
you
yeah,
were nodding
she's
your
also
head, and
works
you were
for an organization that's raising money for the supposedly working. I don't know what in those types
supposedly,
of
she
organizations.
does.
Have you looked at that? What are the overhead costs versus how much they're using to
How much
help?
like the Red Cross are they? How much of a farce are they?
Yeah. Is it like 90% is management fees, and 10% goes to do?
So I'm not privy to any of that information, but I will say that after the IUCN listing, and there was a fair amount of money that was allocated to conservation groups, and then all of a sudden you saw a lot of advertisements for new hires in those said groups.
Okay, got it.
Interesting.
Well, we better cut this off before the black helicopters come hovering over us.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Andy. This has been a real
this
pleasure.
has been great. Wow, I really
fun talking to you, and I'm always happy to talk to a willing and listening audience.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. No, we want to hear we like to get into the nitty gritty of everything. Like, tell us the honest truth, and sometimes it's things we're not doing, or sometimes we're doing too much of something, or vice versa. So no, thank you so much for your time. But yeah, we're definitely going to follow up with this IUCN ruling and when the rest of the world hates you. So
well, I wish I wish I could get a firm grasp on climate, which I will blow the lid off. But I suspect that you probably have a couple words to say on that as well, because it's hard to know the truth as a layman. And we've had
that's not controversial at all. That's something that's definitely real.
No, that's fact. That's fact.
Okay.
Yeah. Don't get me wrong. I'm not a conspiracy theorist or anything like that.
But unless we switch to nuclear power, how are we going to charge all these Teslas, Dr. Davis? You know what I'm saying? Especially in California, where they have they want you not to be on the grid, and don't turn on your air conditioner because they're having power shortages. They just paid to keep Diablo Canyon, the nuclear power plant. They paid like $8 billion just to keep it open, because I think it provides 6% of the California's power, and then they want all electric by 2035. Where does this come from if they don't have nuclear power?
Clean coal. No, I'm just kidding.
Clean coal. Yeah, right.
Yeah, clean coal.
As being in Georgia, I can tell you that we just had a brand new nuclear facility built in Georgia.
Good for you.
Awesome.
First of its kind in decades.
Yeah.
Awesome.
But I can tell you that thing was being built for 10 years, and it was billions of dollars over budget.
Of course.
Not a company in the world who's going to look at that and say, hey, let's build another one.
Yeah.
The overhead is too much. I mean, you're so far in the hole before you even start getting a return. I mean,
but the 10 years, was that because of environmental resistance, or was it
just because of technological difficulties? And there was some issues with the company that was in charge of it. They went bankrupt. There were some other issues. Also, I mean, it went through like a series of different governors at the time, 3 governors, I think. I mean, so it was this very long-winded thing that it finally came to fruition, but at what cost, right?
Right. Well, as they say down there in Georgia, y'all come back now here.
No one says that. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Andy. We will definitely be following up. It's such a pleasure to have you on the show and hearing about your data.
Thank you very much for having me on the show.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I'll call you right back.
All righty.